Don't look away and don't skip. Watch this video until the very end. The last minute is where the truth unravels, and I need you to hear it with me. Chapter 1: The Glass Cathedral. No sound lives in the tail of a comet, not even the sound of your own breathing. Inside the suit, mine was a metronome against the void, counting each moment as we drifted toward the thing our instruments couldn't agree on. An object that reflected like a cathedral built of ice and mirrors. We were 3 aboard the shuttle that day, our crew and the thing we found. The structure was a vault of grudging light, ribs of translucent mineral arcing over a hollow like an open throat. There were carvings that were not carvings and supports that were not supports, all frozen motion, like the inside of a bell the instant after it rings. And at the center we saw them, 3 figures cased in crystal. Human shapes. Human enough. Statues, our commander said through the comms. I don't remember his name anymore, which is a kindness. I remember touch, gloved fingertips on that perfectly smooth casket, and a hum I felt in my gum line in my chest. In that hum was a syllable without consonants, a shape without edges. It uncoiled in my head. I knew then, without knowing how, which one of the 3 was not carved. I leaned closer and my visor filled with a face. Beautiful, yes, but not like a person. Beautiful like a sunrise seen from too close, edges burned away. The eyes were closed. I saw my reflection glide across those lids and the hum answered. I said, "This one is waiting." No one questioned how I knew. We brought the waiting one home. Chapter 2: Quarantine and the First Hunger. The recovery lab was nicknamed Cold Harbor for the way it worried warmth out of your bones. They laid the crystal coffin on a frame and adjusted the electromagnetic nets. I stood outside the pane, palm against glass. They told me to rest and I tried. But in sleep, the hum was a tide, and every wave pressed a wordless promise against my teeth, almost. When the first failure came, it was simple. A power sag, the kind that becomes a footnote later. The coffin vented its frost-like breath. The lab filled with alarms. Through the window I watched the figure sit up, light bending around them the way heat bends over asphalt. A guard rushed forward and then stopped mid-step, as if forgetting what legs were for. He smiled. It was a child's smile. He opened his mouth as though to speak and something left him, the way hot water sighs into cold air, and the figure inhaled. I wish I could say I ran for help. I didn't. I stood there with my hand on glass, the hum rising to a note that vibrated my vision into a trembling smear. On the floor, the guard collapsed into himself like an empty bag of skin, and his eyes were 2 gray coins. The figure stood and turned their face toward me as easily as lifting a hand. They were not male or female. They were arrangement, allure, and answer my nerves had been wanting to ask. Their eyes opened. I fainted. I fell through blackness shot through with mirrors. In each my face stared back with a stranger's calm. When I woke, the lab was torn open like fruit, and Cold Harbor was an emptied hive. I knew 2 things. The figure was no longer a prisoner, and they were not alone in my head. I could feel where they went, the way a tongue finds the socket of a missing tooth. I followed. Chapter Sun: Hollow Voices in the Capital. The city met us with rain that smelled like hot wires. Sirens crawled around corners and then lost heart. The news called it a health event, then an attack, then nothing at all. I walked the streets with a borrowed jacket and the hum guiding me, raw and incessant. It wasn't pain. It was need pushed through the throat of the world. I found the first hollow in a bus shelter. A woman sitting upright with both hands folded around a purse. She might have been asleep, except for the way her chest made a crease and kept it. Her eyes were polished stones. A man tried to wake her and flinched away when his fingers sank into the softness of what remained. He began to whisper prayers. I wanted to tell him they were too small. The figure was near. The axis of my skull tilted toward the museum district, toward glass and iron and old bones arranged to be admired. My feet carried me, and with each block the street lamps faltered. Wind gathered papers and threw them up like white birds. I saw others. 2 paramedics slumped against their ambulance, their lips pale and bitten. A child in a doorway, asleep in a way sleep should never look. The thing that wore a face like a promise did not step out in a corridor of light. It was everywhere light could go. In reflections, in puddles, in the glass of a storefront where my face looked back, and the wall after me was a desert. When it finally stood in front of me, the rain seemed to part around it, as if reminded of gravity. You came, it said, but not in spoken sound. The words arrived holistic, like a smell arrives. This is you, I said, and my voice sounded wrong. This hunger. You made it here. I am not hunger, it answered. I am what moves hunger. The empty space that gives it shape. You brought me through. My throat closed. Somewhere sirens attempted to rise again. Far above, the clouds gathered into a bruise that pulsed, and a column of something not light braided itself up toward the wound in the sky, shimmer after shimmer, the way heat wavers on desert air. I understood it in my bones. It was leaving us in threads, and the threads were going home. Chapter 4: The Anchor. I had thought the link between us was a door. Now I understood it was a nail. I held them here. I was the sweet stitch in the wound that would not close. They had chosen me when my glove met that impossible casket and my breath fogged a window older than breath itself. A soldier found me that night, a woman with rain in her hair and a rifle held like a fragile thing. She told me her name, Solange, and asked me if I was part of this. I told her no. I told her yes. She looked at the hollows we'd passed, at the sky that wouldn't unclench, and said, "If you can hear it, then tell me where it's going." "To the museum with the glass roof," I said without knowing how I knew. "It needs height. It wants to see." We cut through alleys alive with the smell of copper and paper, past people who slept sitting up, past a police horse that stood with its head low, dreaming of grass. The hum became a pressure. It turned my joints to chimes. At moments it spoke in the voices of people I loved, people I had never told secrets to but who held them anyway. It reminded me of the warmth of my first apartment's radiator in winter. I understood it was learning me. Inside the museum, darkness had a texture like velvet that had been dragged through an oil spill. Between the displays I saw others moving, not with steps but with intentions. A man in a lab coat blinked awake as we passed and turned a face of blue veins toward us. His mouth opened in a motion too practiced to be human. Solange put him down gently as if tucking him to bed. We kept going. "You have to break with it," she said. "Cut the rope." "It's not a rope," I said. "It's me." Ahead, the central hall revealed itself like a throat revealing its voice. The glass roof had blown out in a pattern like a flower. Shards hung from iron like dew. At the center of the hall, the figure stood collecting the city's breath into their hands and letting it rise. Where the threads gathered, a shape in the clouds turned and looked down with indifferent curiosity. It was not a ship. It was the absence of ship, the negative space left when something had gone through. "Hello," it said, this time speaking with my voice. Chapter 5: The Equation of Thirst. Standing across from it, I saw every reason to fall to my knees. It wore memory like perfume, my mother's laugh, the silver coin of the moon the night I first saw an ocean, the breath held before a kiss. It offered, and in the offering asked everything back. "You are not a prisoner," I said. It smiled with the corners of my mouth. "Prisoner is a shape the small make with fear," it said. "I am a current. When current finds a riverbed it chooses. You can choose to stop." It shook its head with unmistakable tenderness. "Stopping is death. You will not ask me to die." That was the blade it had been sharpening inside me. Compassion turned toward it like a candle turned toward a mirror. I felt the city sag against its invisible fingers, felt the clock of its appetite measuring us. Solange moved to my side. Her rifle trembled. The museum had a demonstration coil set up for schoolchildren, copper windings and capacitors half hidden behind glossy panels. An exhibit on lightning. A placard grinned about the power of storms. I tore the panels open. The current in the walls was a shy thing compared to what waited above, but it was a language I still spoke. We rigged a ring, we wound cables around the iron bones of the place, we made a throat of metal ready to sing. "I will burn you," I told it, but I was speaking to myself. "If I call enough at once, will you choke?" It stepped close enough that I could see the air thinning around it, like a halo made of pressure. "You cannot hurt what is not a thing. But you can change where I go." I understood, delicious and horrifying, that I could offer myself as the outlet. It had come for breadth, for a city's width of life. It would settle for a single river if the river was deep enough. In the currency of this, I was a bank. Solange put her hand on my shoulder. "Don't," she whispered. "There may be another way." "There is always another way," it said, reading us. "All ways lead." I thought of the guard at Cold Harbor. Of the woman in the bus shelter, her hand still clutching her purse even as everything meaningful had been folded out of her. I thought of the sky above us, soldering itself into something like an eye. I took the coil switch into my hand. I called myself a river. I closed the circuit. Chapter 2, After Light. When the coil sang, it was a hymn of teeth. The sound bent the museum into a clenched fist. Light didn't flash so much as reconsider. The figure reached for me without moving, and my marrow rose like smoke. The threads that had been trickling skyward snapped and gathered, twisting like wires, all of them knotting in my chest. For a moment, I was a city. For a breath, I was a coast. I expected pain. Instead, there was an arithmetic of endings. Every moment I had lived arranged itself along a curve that pointed and pointed towards something I could not name. On that curve, the figure was not my enemy. It was the reason the curve existed at all. We met not in touch, but in intent. It drank and I poured, and the coil screamed. I remember Solange shouting my name. I remember the smell of rain turning to iron. I remember that the eye in the clouds glanced away, disinterested, as the feed it had been expecting burned hot and tangled and took a path it had not predicted. The column of shimmer collapsed into the museum with the sound of glass, remembering it was sand. The figure flickered. For the first time I saw it hesitate. Another way, I said, or thought I did. Back through me. It was not mercy. It was geometry. It followed the deepest channel. The world rushed inward. For a second, longer than a second, I was all the hollows in the city filling up. Then, as quickly as breath forgotten in water, it was gone. I woke up in a hospital that had been a library yesterday. Solange sat in a chair with dried rain on her sleeves. Outside, the sky had returned to clouds instead of conclusions. The news called it a storm. They showed footage of ambulances, of soldiers, of people hugging with too much pressure. They did not show the hollows. They did not show the way the pigeons watched from the edges of roofs, waiting to see if we would move again. Now at night I hear a thin music from the edge of sleep, like glass being tuned. It is not a voice, but I understand it anyway. The current did not die. It folded itself, and I folded with it. Maybe I am still the nail. Maybe I am what remains when the nail is removed. I am telling this so you'll watch the end, because I still don't know where the end is. Sometimes I see the puddles hold their shapes too long after a foot passes through. Sometimes my reflection is late to follow me. If your lights flicker when I talk, if your breath catches in your throat for no reason, that might be me trying the edges of the glass. Stay with me. Listen until the last second. The last second is where all the almosts come together. And if you feel the hum tonight, don't answer. Let it ring out and find me instead. If you made it this far, help keep this channel alive. Subscribe, activate notifications, give the video a like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share it with someone who sleeps too soundly. Your voice keeps the lights on.